What's cracking? Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for tuning in. Today I need to do a modification to my aftermarket front bumper. There's two reasons that this has come about. Number one, recently my crankshaft position sensor went out and I ended up having to get towed just a couple miles back home. And the person that towed me didn't have a lot of experience towing and didn't properly run out the rope before accelerating and really popped me a couple times from a stop. And the result is that it bent one of the brackets on my bumper, and it also tweaked my bumper out of alignment. Now, the bumper itself is fine, it's very stout, and the bracket, although it is bent slightly, it's not going to impact how it sits or anything like that. That's mostly just an observation. Gives you perspective of how hard I got yanked on 2 or 3 occasions. So, but because it tweaked my bumper out of place, I got thinking about how my bumper is attached. Then, a week or so ago, I was watching Matt's Off-Road Recovery, where they picked up a Jeep with pretty much the same front bumper, I believe. And he went to hook it up, wanting to lift up the front end, but he looked at the attachments and said he wasn't comfortable doing that, and they ended up flat towing it rather than picking up the front. Or he picked it up from the axles or something like that. And I looked at my setup and I've got the exact same problem. So let me show you what's going on. So here is my bracket. It attaches to the bumper on either side with these 4 bolts. I don't know if you can see it in this light, but this is where my bracket bent between the bolt and this corner right here. And it's gusseted up at the top and didn't bend up there. It's just this bottom. That's 1/4 inch steel that tweaked just right here. So, but these all held, and then these brackets attached to the frame with these 3 bolts right here. The problem is this frame is not very stout, and I'm not crazy about the attachments, particularly of this bolt that doesn't have a solid nut on the other side. I don't know how strong these type of back spacers or whatever they are as far as holding. So I ordered a frame stiffener that goes from here to about right here, just behind the sway bar linkage. It actually goes quite a bit forward. Now, when I got online to order it, it did say that it was not compatible with the EAG front bumper, which is what I have. And what happens is it extends too far forward, and the brackets, I do have some room for adjustment on these brackets, but I'm almost maxed out for my width, and to do the frame stiffeners I'd have to go out, well, about another 1/4 inch on either side, 1/2 inch altogether, and I just don't have that much room in adjustment, so that's why they are not compatible. So I'm going to pull this front bumper off, and then I'll show you what I have in mind for the modification to get these frame stiffeners to work with this EAG bumper. So this is my new frame stiffener. I've got 2 of them. It's got the holes drilled that should correspond with where the bumper is currently hooked up, and for the bolts for the power steering gearbox. Now the problem is that this portion on the front sticks out too far, and in addition to the width issue that I have already mentioned. So this is where I'm planning to do some modifications. Okay, front bumper is off. That just took a couple minutes, just the 4 bolts on each side. One thing I am glad I did, it was kind of out of laziness, but for my fog lights and my battery tender, I soldered on these quick disconnects. I wasn't really anticipating taking this bumper off, but here we are. And just to disconnect those three things. And then I also did put my vacuum canister under the same corner it was originally. That was 2 bolts, and that was out, and that was ready to come off. So I didn't have to deal with taking the lights off or anything like that, which is good. So now I've got my brackets exposed, which will come off next, but before I do that, I don't know if you can see where the bottom of that one is punching out just a little bit. I'm going to grab my mini sledge and see if I can just tap that a couple times and get that to settle back in. Surprisingly, that worked. This is thick enough I didn't think I'd be able to manually bend it, but I've got that pretty much lined back up. My powder coat didn't fare too well, but I'll take straightness over paint. I can hit that with a little rust inhibitor and call it good. Be very satisfied. So, alright, next item of business is to remove these brackets, and then we can get ready to start doing our cutting to mash these things together. Dry fit time. So my 3 holes where the bracket and bumper attach all line up. The other holes clearance just right. However, I do have a problem. There is not enough room on either one of these. I don't know if you can see the other one. It's tucked up here. There is not enough room to get a socket in there if I ever needed to get these bolts out to maintain or work on the power steering gearbox. So I either need to drill those holes out bigger or pull the bolts out and put a washer on them and let them attach from the back side. I'm going to have to sort that out. The other thing that I have decided to do, because of my bent bracket experience, is rather than have it oriented this way with the gusset on top, clearly there's a lot of stress that goes on the bottom, and so I'm thinking I'm going to swap sides. Make this the passenger side one with the gusset on the bottom where it can support that load a little bit better. So I'm going to swap sides on those. So with that said, I've promised this several times. Let me show you what modification I am planning to ultimately make. First thing, let me say that both frame stiffeners they sent were identical, so they are not specific side to side, so they all have these same holes. So my plan is to take the bracket, my holes line up here, I'll put the bolts in just to keep them together, and then I want to cut straight up right here, right in front of this this gusset, and then weld the bracket onto the remaining frame stiffener, and then put that in place, weld this to the frame, and essentially this bracket will be part of the frame at that point. So the other consideration is to also weld this piece onto it for additional support right here where things attach. I'm not sure if I need that or not. I'm going to think that through. These metal thicknesses are pretty much the same. They might be, the frame stiffener might be a hair thicker, but it is insignificant for this modification. So next item of business is to get my cuts over here. So I'm going to start by cutting this bracket. I'm going to grab my square and just draw a line and use my metal circular saw to cut that off, and then I'll use this bracket on here lined up with the bolt holes to give me my cut on the stiffener. I have my cuts made, and here is essentially my final vision of the new bracket. Basically it. So it would bolt on here, be welded on with some bolts, and then this will still hook the bumper on. So I think this will be super sturdy and a big improvement on the front end. So I'm going to do the other side, and then all my cutting will be done. Alright, I have all my pieces cut. I am ready to weld, but that's going to have to wait because I have a Father's Day dinner to get to. So I need to get this mess cleaned up, get myself cleaned up so I'm presentable for that. So I'm going to stop for tonight and probably get to the welding tomorrow. So this is all so far very promising. Looking at how this is going to work out, I'm thinking I don't need to weld the cut off pieces of the brackets on. I just don't think that's going to be necessary. I think this will be strong enough, especially with this welded to the frame. It's a new day and we are back on the front bumper and about time to weld. So I ground a little bit off of the original bracket so that I have a cleaner weld, and I've got these lined up. I'm just using this multi-gauge, so I'm flat on this side and flat with the top, so that should have me lined up. So my cut is kind of splayed this way a little bit. That's okay. Also, as you can see, I've got my welding table out. This is so that I can weld at a comfortable height for this. So with that, I have taken a measurement, and I have decided that 3/4 of an inch down is ideal placement. So that's what I'm going to go. My mark was really close to that, but I ended up dropping it about another 1/8 of an inch. So 3/4 is where I'm comfortable with. And with that, let's get a couple tacks on this and then burn it in. The brackets are both together. They're looking great, nice and straight. I'm very pleased. I got the other one, the passenger side one, all ground on this inside so that this will lay flat for a good weld to the Jeep. I got halfway through this one when my battery died on my grinder, so that is charging up, and then I will finish that. In the meantime, I'm doing a little prep. So I'm going to get the Jeep ready. I've already scraped off the excess dirt, and now I need to clean that and grind it. You can see my scrape marks, so back to that rear hole right there. That's my welding line, so I'm gonna have to get the grinder in there and get me some clean metal for good adhesion. Also, what I'm going to do, this is the bracket that bent from being towed, and that bent has caused some chipping in the paint. So I'm gonna go ahead, and I've already scraped the chips off, and I'm going to grab some rust inhibitor and get on that piece. See, it chipped on both sides. I'm going to get some rust inhibitor on that while I've got easy access to this back side. And then I've also noticed on my bumper, so I believe this is from when I also got towed and it tweaked my bumper and lifted this end up, and it scraped on a screw that's underneath there. And so anyway, I'm gonna hit that with some paint, and I noticed a couple other spots right in here on both sides of that. I've got a little rust, and same thing on the other side. So while I've got it out, might as well throw some rust inhibitor on that and prevent any further rusting. So just like that, Got all my little spots done. These ones on top, you can see them, but they blend relatively nicely. So I generally really like this bumper, but I do have two complaints about it. It seems like frame stiffeners are compatible with all the other aftermarket front bumpers out there, to the extent that the ones I ordered specifically mentioned this manufacturer as not being compatible. So I would really like EAG to address that, because frame stiffeners, I think, are pretty common for rigs that you would be putting an aftermarket bumper on. And secondly, there's apparently a little bit of quality control issue with them, because I'm noticing that these rust spots, except for the ones that are inflicted myself, but the ones that are just happening are at weld points. So I don't know if it's something with their powder coat procedure or just quality control, but that shouldn't be happening on this bumper. So that is a bit of a disappointment. But not a big deal. It's ready to go, and I'll just finish back to the brackets now to get those mounted. I have the driver's side plate in place. You can see where I cleaned up the metal on the frame. I'm right at the edge here, but a little derby weld will probably be okay. And I'm lined up. I've got the 3 original bolts in, plus the 2 from the power steering pump, which have this lined up right where I want it. So I am ready to weld this side in. Also, looking at it this way, my micrometer tells me that that is close enough. So I did a dry fit, and it's a good thing I did, because this placement is not going to work. I'm a little bit too high this way. So I should have put these brackets a little bit lower. But it is what it is. I believe I have a little adjustment in this. I'm going to loosen these bolts and see if I can adjust that down a little bit. And hopefully that will give me the space I need. I could get it to fit, but it would be flush against the bottom of my grill here, and I don't want that. I want there to be a little gap for moisture and stuff to seep through and essentially allow it to dry faster and easier. So let's loosen some bolts and see if I can adjust this down. Okay, I'll take it. I have adjusted it down, mostly in the front here. You could cross-reference earlier in the video how far apart these were. This is down probably close to 1/4 inch. And it's good enough. It's not quite where I would like it. It's still a little bit close, maybe touching, but it's not pressing. So I'm gonna go with it, because to make any other changes would involve either cutting this bracket off and welding it again, or something drastic like that. Another reference is I had this hole completely centered, and it is now off. So I had to torque it this way just a little bit, so it's up and slightly forward. But that's okay. It will hold. It is straight enough. My fit works, so I'm ready to weld this plate onto the front here. So it is advisable when welding on a vehicle to disconnect the battery. Supposedly that helps prevent frying a computer or circuitry. I do have one complication where I am welding 1/4 inch to probably 1/16 at best, possibly even 18. Even though it's the frame, it's still not that thick. So it's always problematic when welding two different thicknesses of metal. So I'm going to turn my welder down just a little bit, my amperage, and I'm going to concentrate on the thicker metal and just kind of tap over to the thinner metal just to connect them together. So that's my plan for that. Hopefully I don't burn any big holes in the frame here. And let's get this side on. And with that, the driver's side is burned in. So I did make kind of a silly mistake. After I walked you through changing the settings, I guess in my mind thought that I had done it, but I hadn't done it. So this stretch of weld right here is the 1/4 inch settings, which burned pretty hot, burned into the stiffener quite a bit. I was like, what is going on? And then it dawned on me what had happened, kind of what I had done. So I changed the settings, came over here and started on the bottom. Got a much nicer weld there. My favorites though, actually this one up here on the top. I think that's a pretty good bead. Down this back side's not terrible either, but and then it dawned on me, with that welded on, I really don't even need to put these 3 bolts in, but I will anyway, just for aesthetics. So anyway, the driver's side is in. It's still pretty hot, so I'm letting it cool. Probably throw some paint on it tomorrow. What I want to do now is resituate the Jeep so I can do this to the passenger side. I was hoping I could put the Jeep in a position where I could do both, but it didn't work out that way. So I'll hook up the battery real quick, resituate it, and do this one more time, and then the bumper will be pretty much done. I've got a problem that's causing me a little bit of a existential crisis on a personal level. I dry fit the bumper, and this bracket is plain and simply too high. The amount of adjustment just isn't going to compensate. So I have 3 options. I can elongate the holes, these 3 holes here, so that this whole bracket comes down. Or I can skip that and just lower the bracket and just weld it on lower. Which seems like a good idea, except that I've got a couple of gaps that I think I could shrink up if I could get some bolts on to pull it together. Or my third option is to cut this bracket off at this weld, move this portion down, and re-weld. I really want to get this done tonight. I'm trying to decide what would satisfy my OCD and be the most efficient. And that's a really tough balance to find. A decision has been made. I am going to cut this off and move this bracket down and then weld it back together. Cutoff wheel made pretty quick work of it. I'm done, and then so I cut through on this side, but I still had weld on the other side, so I put the flap disc back on and ground that smooth so that I can get this to lie flat the way I need it to. So now I just need to remeasure my drop, square this back up, and it's also time to get the welder back out. So here's my thought process. I originally measured down this way with the bracket 3/4 of an inch. My calculations last night was that I needed these holes to be offset by about 50%. Measuring the bigger hole that is on the Jeep, it's almost exactly 1/2 inch. So that adds another 1/4 inch, puts me at 1 inch down. Plus, I've got more room to adjust up than I have to adjust down. So I've decided to go a little bit more than that. I have added another about 3/8 of an inch. So that's how far down this bracket is now. I'm using the cutoff wheel as a spacer so that I still get my length correct. So that is accounting for the kerf. And then I've got my multi-square here to square things up. So I am pretty much in place right here and ready to weld this up again. With no desire to do this all a third time, I'm doing the wise thing and doing a dry fit. So I've got my bracket just tacked with a couple of welds, and I've got my bumper up here in place. I've got a little bit of space there. I can live with that. I don't have any on this corner, which I never did, and I don't know that there's much I can do about that. So it just might be what it is. I mean, I don't think I cut this particularly straight when I cut the bottom flange off, but even if I take another 1/8 inch, it's still hitting this corner, so I don't think I can really adjust that. Where I could possibly adjust it is where the bumper rides kind of on that corner right there. So maybe I'll grind that corner down just a little bit so that this can come down about another 1/8 of an inch or so, pretty much to match the gap I have on this side, which you can see is quite a bit better. So I think that's probably what I need to do, is that modification. So but I'm comfortable with where this bracket is lining up. My screw holes are lining up perfectly, so I'm going to go ahead and burn this back in. Okay, so I propped my vacuum canister up out of the way, and I also took off the grill so that I could pull this wire loom out of the way to get this top portion right here. And with that, I declare I'm welded in. So not quite the same number of welds on this one. I left this spot open because the gap was so big it wasn't worth filling. I got this one, I did get the gap here filled. I've got the bottom, and then all around this back side. I'm really happy with how these welds look back here. Had a pretty nice system going, except for this one little thing of bird poop right here. But we should be pretty much ready for the bumper to go back on. Just like the other side, this one is not lining up with the bolt holes. I thought I had compensated enough that I could lift it up and get it where I needed, but I was wrong. And what bothers me the most about this is now I have to do the same thing that I did to the other side, where I have to cut the bracket off, weld it back on lower. The problem is I've already welded the stiffener onto the Jeep, so I have to do it on vehicle, and that's just a lot harder. So anyway, I'm going to get this bumper back off. I have the bolts holding it on the other side, so I'll pull those, pull the bumper off, and grab the cutoff wheel. It was dark last night, so I didn't film anything around that, but obviously I've got this cut off, and now I'm going to take my flap disc and grind this ledge down on both pieces, and then use a magnet to hold it in place and hopefully straight while I weld it back on. And I did put a pencil mark, I don't know if that'll come up on camera, right there, which is my new top. So that's how far I'm going down. Probably like 3/8 of an inch. I've got a couple different magnets, but I believe this is my strongest one, so I'm gonna try it. It's holding itself up, and I'll probably need 2 hands to do this, but let me get it set up and I'll show you if it works. The magnet does hold both pieces, however, it doesn't have quite enough strength to hold this one up. It droops towards the bottom, which is not a huge problem. When I go to tack it, I can just lift it up a little bit, put a tack on, and then it should hold. So the main thing I want the magnet for, it is doing, and that is to line it up this way, make sure I'm not swaying or either direction. So the magnet is doing that. This other minor flaw is easy to overcome. So alright, I'm going to disconnect the battery on the Jeep, get my ground set up, and get this back on. I've got some other things to do to the Jeep that I didn't want to resituate it for welding, so I instead hooked up my welder to an extension cord for this fix, and I got it burned in. It is, I literally let off the trigger to finish and blew the circuit. So, and that is, the problem is my extension cord is not suitable for drawing this kind of power, but for just a small thing like this, I thought I'd try it, and I feel good about how it worked. So this is back on. I also, just out of curiosity, grabbed my combination square and measured the distance over here on the bottom, and between that side and this side, I'm a solid 1/8 inch off, this side being high. Now I'm kind of curious. I think I'll measure the top. So I did put my combo square on the top, and I can't get a perfect reading because the front is in the way a little bit. So I had to use some of my micrometer, but my micrometer tells me that I'm 1 1/4 inches on both of them, or like within a 1/16 of an inch. That is good enough for me, and that'll work. So, alright, I need to clean this up. It's still a little hot, so I'll let it continue to cool, and then I'll get some more paint on it, and then the bumper should be able to go on. And there it is, back in place. It fit up very nicely. I've got good gap, close to the same on each side, and I now have confidence in its ability to be used for recovery and for a winch, which will be installed in another video. I hope this was helpful to you in some way. Thanks for watching. If you wouldn't mind, take a quick moment and click the like button. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos on this project. It doesn't cost you a thing. It could really help my channel. Thanks for coming along, and I hope to see you on the next one.